we're not going to go through all the commentary around it. We're not going to go through any other articles. We're just going to go straight to the truth, straight to the point, and we're going to talk about what this is going to mean for the U.S. economy if this happens, versus the possibility of this just being a negotiating tactic, which will also still have its own implications. But with how Donald Trump has been indecisive on whether any of his tariffs that he puts in place are permanent, or if they're negotiable, or if they're flexible, this has not only frozen, a lot of commentators from saying, okay, this is how it's going to do the economy. This is how it's going to push the economy this way. It's going to push the economy that way. But it's also frozen investors. It gives him flexibility, but it means that incentivizing the domestic production by creating a tariff bubble for these companies that could at any moment be popped because you have not made clear that they're going to be here forever. It makes it hard for it to have the desired impact of large scale industrial investment domestically. And so I watched Trump throw out these numbers, and we don't know immediately if it's a negotiating tactic, if it's something that it's going to throw out, or if it's not. And that strategy in and of itself has economic flaws. But let's just start with Trump's new gambit. The European Union, this was on Truth Social, of course. He truthed it out, an official truth. An official truth. It's so Orwellian, man. An official truth from Donald J. Trump. The European Union, which was formed for the primary purpose of taking advantage of the United States on trade. It wasn't. The European Union was not only not founded with the primary purpose of taking advantage of the United States on trade, it was founded with the explicit endorsement of the United States, wanting to see the European Union cooperate economically and rebuild itself after the disasters of World War II, because we wanted people who could consume our products. We wanted people who could buy our Coca-Cola, our trucks, use our steel to rebuild their buildings. Where are they going to get all this from? This was not, we wanted it. We wanted it. Has been very difficult to deal with, the EU, that is. Their powerful trade barriers, VAT taxes, ridiculous corporate penalties, non-monetary trade barriers, monetary manipulations, unfair and unjustified lawsuits against American corporations, and more have led to a trade deficit with the U.S. of more than $250,000 a year, a number which is totally unacceptable. Now, there's a few problems here. Now, I could go through all the things that he calculates here: the VAT taxes, the trade barriers, corporate penalties. And when we talk about corporate penalties, by the way, this could be stuff like a corporation violates the law, therefore it gets a penalty, which is not a trade barrier. If every company in the United States takes a practice that is illegal in Europe, then it can become a trade barrier unless they create an alternative that can be exported to the European Union. But that's not like a traditional trade barrier, like a tariff. But if we could go through all of this, but let's just skip to the point. $250,000 trade deficit. And a lot of these calculations I've seen in the past, and I believe it's probably repeated here, Donald Trump excludes the services industry. And so what he'll do is he'll use physical industrial goods and consumer goods like wines or, perishables of some sort, like a food, like beef, or, a car, something like that. And he'll only count things like this. But service goods, whether it be, something in the tech sector or something like that, and a lot of people in the United States are employed in the service industry, it is one of our primary exports to the European Union. He explicitly does not include it. In fact, when he was trying to draw up trade policy throughout the EU, he actually calculated a certain trade deficit with the Swiss that if you were to include the service, the service economy and the service economy export into Switzerland, it completely eliminates our trade deficit. Now, not only is this number not accurate, not only is the way that he calculates the trade deficit not accurate, not only is a lot of these things being brought up as trade barriers or whatever, like corporate penalties, horrible corporate penalties, some of these might not be accurate. Some of these are probably accurate, but I don't believe this is the venue and how to fix them. But if when you stack all this up together, right? The lack of accuracy, all of this, how do you negotiate with the United States? Because what the United States position is, you need to buy more of our stuff, whether or not you want to buy more of those stuff. And if you do not buy more of that stuff, then we will make it harder for you to sell your stuff in our country, which will then, of course, create the incentive for them to do the same to the United States, which means that the United States' largest trading partner will be in an escalating trade war with the United States. And when I say it is the America's number one trading partner, I mean it's ahead of China, it's ahead of India, it's ahead of every other grouping in the world. The EU is our number one trading partner. So if you take that into consideration, this is pretty big. That's pretty substantial. And so going out there and saying, "Hey, how dare you trade more with us than we do with you?" I mean, not only is it silly on the idea that that could be just because they produce more things that we want, that the American people want, but let's say you target that for its own sake. What does that mean for the dock workers and truckers who take those European wines, who take those European electronic goods and ship them across the country, who are now going to have less shipments, which means less overtime, which means less take-home pay? There's economic effects here that I don't even think are being like properly calculated, because they just see, again, trade deficit, that deficit bad, and it just stops there. And again, this is all dependent upon the idea that this goes through, because I'm saying this as if what he says here, and we'll go on to it in a moment, is actually going to go into place. Our discussions with them are going nowhere. Therefore, I am recommending a straight 50% tariff on the European Union starting on June 1st, 2025. There is no tariff if the product is built or manufactured in the United States. Yes, that's what a fucking tariff is. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Okay. So, right off the bat, let me just say, whether this is a negotiating tactic or not, this upset the markets. The markets reacted negatively, and I think that it's going to re-add some investor anxiety to the market. I think it's also going to continue to flame consumer anxiety, especially since a lot of things are being consumed are coming from Europe. Now, this is all before whether we know he's going to actually go through with it or not. Because what this is telling investors, what this is telling consumers who had started to believe that things were calming down, that the tariff wave, the initial tariff rates had stopped, and now the negotiation process had begun, that this was a way of Donald Trump opening up loud and proud to establish America's, willingness to go to the extreme, to make him look like the wild man, and now they're negotiating. Well, now they're unsure of that. So this is going to upset investors. This is going to upset consumers, and we've already seen the markets react accordingly, with the Dow and other top stocks down. Okay, so that's the first thing before we know this is going to go into place or not. Okay, so now, assuming that it goes into place, a 50% tariff on our number one trading partner will mean that consumers will not be able to buy the products that they used to at the prices that they used to. There is no, as Trump suggests, eating the margins here, that Walmart and so needs to eat the margins. If there's a 50% tariff, a 10% tariff for a portion of time, you could see a company maybe eat the margins. Hell, depending on how good the company's doing and how dedicated they are to it, maybe they could. Would it be at their own benefit? Would the company rather just raise prices? Maybe. But a 50% tariff is too high. It's too chest banging to avoid. You cannot hide that. You cannot lose that in the margins. You cannot take some like cuts of Christmas bonuses or something, like a 50% margin. While it'll hurt some companies more than others, and it'll hurt some industries and consumers more than others, anybody who's trying to buy goods from the European Union is going to feel it. So that's the first thing. Consumers will feel it. And when I say consumers, I do, of course, mean the person who buys it off the shelf, but I also mean people who consume literally anything. So if you're a research company and you need to get some super super microscopic lens in order to work on the hydraulics or whatever of some machine, consider yourself screwed. You need to buy a CNC from Europe, consider yourself screwed. You have 50% tariff. You got to buy some industrial good, you got to buy some electronic for your industry to work on this scientific endeavor, to work on the next phase of your tech program. Well, if that's in Europe, our number one trading partner, 50% tariff. It's more expensive to innovate. It's more expensive to import the goods that are not being produced domestically in the United States right now. And even if they were being produced domestically in the United States, they're going to be more expensive. And we don't have them right now. So if we don't have them right now, if this is put in place on June 1st, it's not like you can get a factory up and running in a couple of months. It's going to take years. And if you do it properly, it's probably going to take many years. When I say many, I mean like something like 2 or 3 years. It'll be by the time Trump is leaving office, that will see these factories going up. Now, Trump did talk about like exemptions when it comes to certain tariffs on phone companies. He said for those who wanted to build the Apple phone in the United States, which will be more expensive to do, and the consumers will have to pay a higher price tag, whether or not he wants Apple to bite that margin in the middle, they will have to if he goes through with this. I think ultimately, Tim Apple, as Trump put it, Tim Cook, then the rest of these people will do their best to convince him that this is not a viable mechanism because people will just not buy those expensive phones. They just won't if they're built domestically in the United States. But take that philosophy, maybe if he put that stay on the Europeans, then he could talk to the European companies about putting a stay on the 50% tariff if XYZ. But he hasn't mentioned that. He just said tariff on June 1st. And even if he did that, that would just be beating around the bush on the issue. Point is, this 50% tariff is going to make products from Europe more expensive. This tariff is likely going to be, at least partially so, inflationary, and we're probably going to see some inflationary effects by the end of the year, especially if this goes through. And there's also the big thing that we haven't talked about, which is reciprocal tariffs. The fact that if we go through with this, we will be forcing the hands of the Europeans. Right now, the Europeans haven't responded, and they've chosen to largely tame their responses to the 10% tariff, to the much higher 25% tariff, to a bunch of these individual tariffs. They've tamed the response in an attempt to negotiate with the Trump administration. If the Trump administration follows these negotiations, which have been going on, which Trump is maybe trying to increase his leverage of, if he responds to this by actually implementing a 50% tariff, Europe will feel forced to use the tools that they've developed since the Trump first term in order to have more economic responses, more economic tools in the tool belt to engage in trade war. They will tariff American companies. There will be repercussions. And our greatest trading partner will not only will it be more difficult for us to buy goods from them, and that'll hurt the American consumer, that'll hurt truckers, that'll hurt dock workers, but then also they'll end up putting tariffs on our goods, which means less sales to Europe. Putting aside any little chitter chatter I could make about any effects on the tourism industry in the United States. Sorry, I just got a WhatsApp notification. It was telling me, Dylan, please continue to talk. Everybody agrees with you. Anyway, this is a bad idea. This is not only a bad idea, this is a terrible idea. If the purpose is to bring industry back to the United States, you should not make it seem like it's negotiable. If the purpose is to try to inform the public on trade, the way he tries to calculate trade deficits is ridiculous, especially when we have such a large service economy and Europe consumes a lot of American services. If the purpose of this is to increase leverage in trade negotiations, it's still going to have long-term, I mean, maybe not long-term structural economic impact, but it's going to make people for months continue to be nervous at the bare minimum about the possibility that more tariffs could be right around the corner, that the tariff war just kind of jumps out of the bush. And if we put it in place, the inflationary impacts, the trade impacts, the job impacts on both sides of the Atlantic will be negative. It doesn't help us, it doesn't help them. And it especially does not help the United States, who's trying to argue that the Europeans need to spend more on defense spending, that we need them to contribute more, we need them to spend more. It'll be difficult if we enter a global recession. And it will be difficult if they start to experience major trouble with their top trading partner, where they get a lot of tax benefits from, from the people who work domestically, export stuff to the United States. The lack of economic activity will have a detrimental effect on their economy, which is currently trying to bear the brunt of not only the aftermath of the energy effects of the Russian energy cutoff, but also the massive defense spending increases that we're seeing in places like Germany and the new financial legal ground that the governments have been given to send aid to Ukraine and expand defense spending. And so if we're asking them to take the lead on defense spending while also undercutting their economic base in a strategy that benefits neither of us, even if we divert at the last second and avoid the worst outcome, this is a strategy that Trump is banking on the dragging of American credibility through the mud to attain leverage negotiations. Leverage that I have yet to see bear any fruit outside of that one trade deal with the UK, one of our non-major trading partners, not to be mean to them, just to talk about, it's not India, it's not China, it's not the European Union. And it wasn't really that substantial of a deal to begin with. We're talking about tariff exemptions on Rolls-Royce engines, tariff exemptions on cars that are not actually tariff exemptions. They put the tariff at 10%, and the tariff returns at 25% once the car is over $100,000 cars a year. Last year it was 137,000. So if we just got the same numbers from the UK that we got last year, there'd be 10% tariff on 100,000 cars and a 25% tariff on 37,000 cars. That's what we negotiated from 25%. It's not that substantial. And we're only talking about specific industries. A bunch of other industries, I mean, the tariff is still in effect. Okay, point is, we have yet to see any great benefits from these negotiations. And so before we start a second wave of volleys at the financial structures of what we've built over the Atlantic over 75 years, maybe even more, maybe, just maybe, we sit down and have a frank conversation about trade instead of shooting ourselves in the foot and then asking questions later. Okay, should we go into the Russia stuff next? We can do the 50% tariff update. We can do the 50% tariff update. So Trump has claimed victory in a standoff with the European Union. So Trump said he was going to implement a 50% tariff on June 1st. And yesterday we did a long segment talking about the implications of if this is implemented and whether or not it's a negotiation tactic. Well, while I definitely said it was very likely that it was a negotiation tactic, we now have confirmation it was a negotiation tactic. But I mean, we'll talk about like what this type of negotiating means for the United States long term. But let's get through this in the short term. So he's backed off of it. He said, never mind about doing the 50% tariff on our largest trading partner. When he said he was going to implement it, the tariffs, the markets reacted negatively. When he said he was going to remove it, the markets reacted positively. And so there seems to be this trend of Trump jerking around the markets, putting us right back to square one and then kind of claiming victory, as he did after the standoff with China when we haven't gotten any measurable benefits yet, as he's doing now with the tariffs on the European Union, even though we haven't again gotten any measurable benefits yet. The only actual deal that has been agreed to so far is the deal with the United Kingdom, which, I mean, is what you would expect considering the amount of time he's had to negotiate and the amount of effort I think the administration's put in, which I think is half-assed. I mean, what was the great deal that he keeps touting around is the only deal they've been able to make so far? Well, it is that the 25% tariff will be moved down to a 10% tariff on exported on exported cars, but it'll go back to the 25% tariff if it goes over 100,000. Last year was 137,000. This isn't like, that isn't a fantastic deal. There was an exemption on Rolls-Royce engines. So if you Rolls-Royce engines. So if you want to buy a Rolls-Royce, it'll be cheaper. Congratulations, working class Americans. You can now buy a cheaper Rolls-Royce engine thanks to Trump's fantastic. Actually, no, you can buy a Rolls-Royce engine at the same price as before Trump started this negotiating. This is what you would expect from a short negotiating period where Keir Starmer wanted a political win because he's taking heat right now, where Trump wanted a political win because he's taking heat right now. This isn't victory. To merely kick the can down the road is not victory, because Trump is saying this was a victory with the EU because talks are going nowhere. Now they're going somewhere, and now he's going to further delay tariffs to June 9th. Look, I don't know what's going on in these private discussions between Trump and European Union officials. And I can't say if there was some major concession that really changed Trump's mind, or if it was something tiny, like we'll recognize like the Gulf of America. Who knows? But if it was something tiny, if it was something significant, if it was nothing at all, there are a lot of incentives as to why Trump would want to continue to kick this down the road. Number one, the deal that he got with the United Kingdom, which was treated as it was significant only because Keir Starmer wanted it to be significant for political reasons. It was that way because of the time that we had. Trump hasn't had the time to renegotiate the entirety of our trade relationships with over 60 countries that he implemented these tariffs on. And now there's the European Union, there's the Chinese, there's the Indians, there's the Vietnamese, there's all these countries. I mean, well, the European Union is not a country, but that's a coalition of countries. But the European Union is our largest trading partner. To completely renegotiate our trade relationship in completely based off a totally new paradigm, not the free trade, continued, specialization in their industry, specialization in our industries. They buy our service. No, we want to completely rework this. No, and this is bad. So we need to go in a totally new model, and we're going to negotiate it in 3 to 4 months. If you're going to completely revamp the entire trade system, you're going to have to do it in a longer period of time. It's going to be kicked down the road because I just don't think Trump can negotiate this great big deal in the time that he has without calling it a great big deal, and everybody will see it's not really. If he pumps out another UK style deal with the European Union and then the Chinese, I don't think it's going to come with great political wins, because I think people will see right through it, honestly. Maybe not his most fervent supporters, but when it comes to the rest of the United States, those who were hoping for some economic change, for an economic boost, who have been given nothing of the sort because of all of this chaos, I don't think that they will appreciate it all that much. I think that there's like the individual investment announcements are something that's beneficial, and that's something that can go somewhere. But declaring victory with no serious victory will go nowhere. And so not only is this bad for the United States economy, this uncertainty, not only are, raising tariffs to, decades high going to eventually be passed down to the consumer in some capacity, no matter how much he wants Walmart to eat it. But I mean, I just don't think that this is going to work out for Trump. But let me throw one last thing at you guys. One last thing about long-term credibility for the United States. If we keep doing this, and look, there was a ton of incentives to push him forward, like we discussed. I understand why he eventually kicked the can down the road. He's the largest trading partner. They needed time. They didn't want a 50% tariff to send the markets back in the spiral. They didn't want that to be passed down to the consumer when Trump was largely elected on the economy. They're trying to do this tightrope walk. I understand why they backed off, but the pattern of behavior is embarrassing. It's embarrassing. April 2nd, 20% tariff. 20% tariff on the European Union. Okay. Boom. He comes out. It's the big, it's Liberation Day, guys. We're doing something different. We're gonna go a little wacky style now. We're going around the world and we're gonna tell you guys what's what for the future of trade. 20% tariff. Take that. Decades long high tariff on our largest trading partner. That's significant. That's going to be passed down to the consumer, and that's not targeted. It's across the board. So it touches stuff that we do have domestic alternatives for, and it touches stuff that we don't have domestic alternatives for. It touches stuff like certain wines that are just not produced in the United States, or certain industrial goods or electronic goods or things that are more serious than the wines. To be quite frank, for like the economic foundation of the country, not to be mean to the alcohol store employees or those in the service, those who work in retail who would be affected by decreased product. I'm just saying, just across everything. And this wasn't just on the European Union. It was all across all these different countries, including on goods that, again, we had no domestic alternative for. I mean, we're putting tariffs on bananas when there's no alternative for bananas. So what's the purpose of the tariff on the banana? He was treating it like a sledgehammer, not a scalpel, when affecting people's purchasing power. Then, after this, jolt to the market, Trump says he got a little yippy. Everything got a little yippy. Everybody got too yippy, which is a golf term to say uh, people are freaking out. It's and he said, let's gonna do a 90-day delay, and we'll just keep the 10% universal tariff. Except for Russia. But I mean, 10% universal tariff on Ukraine and this, but not Russia because that'll disturb negotiations. Except for Ukraine, they can have negotiations and have a 10% tariff, but not the Russians. Okay, and so this was delayed for 90 days. Then the dude doesn't even wait for the 90-day delay to be done. Okay, he doesn't wait for the 90-day delay to be done because, again, the 90-day delay, this 10% universal tariff, that was on April 9th. So we're talking 6-7 days after the 20% tariff was put into place. It's May 23rd, so we're talking 45 days. He still had like another 45 days he could have banked on to announce something or continue to negotiate and use the time. Because again, this is not enough time to renegotiate such wide and expansive trade policy with our largest trading partner who buys so much of our services and has yet, despite all of the economic uncertainty, to retaliate with serious reciprocal tariffs that could really damage the service sector in the United States, which employs a lot of people. Not to even talk about the dock workers in Baltimore, if I want to make this local for me, or the truckers that work all across this country, both on the West Coast when we're talking about Asian Pacific trade, but on the East Coast when we're talking about European trade. So literally 45 days later, he still had 45 days he could have waited, but no, 45 days later, boom, May 23rd, 50% tariff threatened on June 1st. Then 2 days later, never mind. Now, let me be clear though. When I say, hey, the 50% tariff, it's gone, I'm not saying it's gone, but, 50% tariff has been reeled in and Trump's claiming victory, woohoo. I'm not saying that to say, okay, now they're going to sit down and finish their serious negotiations and we're going to get somewhere. No, Trump delayed the 50% tariff. He didn't get rid of the 50% tariff. He didn't say the 50% tariff is gone. He just delayed it. And he delayed it to July 9th. So all he's done is bought himself another month in a fashion that saw him walk back his tariff in 48 hours. This flip-flop. Look, if they just had a plan from the start, a escalating tariff rate to say, look, we're going to start with 5%, there's going to be 10% and 13, 14, 15. And this is something that would give them time to negotiate, but also an incentive to negotiate quickly, because the longer they take, there's a strategy Trump could have used that I still would have disagreed with, probably, but at
A
least would have
curd
had some
is a
more
curd.
competency to it. This is
If
flip
you want
flop.
to see what tariffs do, shop for groceries at Walmart.
By the way, Walmart is still holding back a lot of the cost on the consumer. They say they still have a lot of stock left, but we'll see how that goes with time. Thank you for the $5. What we're seeing here is the same problem we see with Trump's negotiating on geopolitical matters outside of trade. For example, war. He tells the Russians and the world on the campaign trail that he's going to get there. He's in there. He's going to tell. Well, first he says he's going to finish this before he's even in office. He's going to win the election, and then the guns are going to like cease firing, because the Russians and the Ukrainians are going to know the business is up. This was his perspective. This was Tim Pool's perspective. This was the perspective of a lot of knuckle dragging commentators, as well as the now president himself. Then it became 24 hours. Then it became 100 days. But the way he pitched it on the campaign trail was, he's going to get in there, he's going to bring them both to the table, and whoever is the problem, he's going to either punish Ukraine through the cutting off of aid, and they'll feel the pressure, or for the Russians, it was massive aid to Ukraine, massive weapon sales to Ukraine, and massive sanctions on the Russians. And we haven't seen that delivered. We haven't seen that delivered in any fashion. And when he demands a ceasefire and it's not delivered, there's no consequences. When they agree to some ceasefires, like a civilian ceasefire or a energy ceasefire, they agree to it, and then they violate it almost immediately. When they
A
make
curd
demands,
is a
like a
curd.
30-day demand, like, hey, if you do not have a ceasefire, an immediate unconditional ceasefires for 30 days, there will be consequences. And they do it not as just an individual, just not as the White House, but as a coalition with European allies. And then it's like, nope, we're not going to do that. Sorry. What does he do? He does nothing. At a certain point, the credibility of your threats makes this type of gambling with, like, oh, we'll have we'll push this pressure on you, well, maybe we will pull the trigger, maybe we won't, you don't know. It continues to decrease its effectiveness, and it's part of the reason Putin watching him negotiate in this way is part of the reason why I don't think this has had any success with the Russians. That this idea of Trump being the wild cowboy is true to the extent that he could change his position quickly and he flip-flops, but to this idea that he carries heavy bullets and he's willing to use it quickly and the consequences will be severe, that hasn't borne out for them. And when it comes to a lot of this trade negotiations, it has borne out, that it hasn't borne out, that it has borne out, that it hasn't borne out. So at a certain point, the credibility of these threats diminish. That's not to say they don't completely go away. I mean, just creating the economic uncertainty in and of itself is a problem. America has tremendous economic leverage due to the fact that we have such a gigantic consumer economy. We're still the largest economy in the world. So, if you're the Japanese, or if you're the Koreans, or if you're the Europeans, you still want to engage with America economically. You still want to trade with them. And so, you know, you will entertain negotiations insofar as to not cause economic panic within your own country. But I think that the strategy of getting like sizable, significant concessions that are going to be worth all of this turmoil is flawed, from the fact that nobody's going to take these threats seriously, not only because of the incentives Trump has, but also just the way he's played his cards, since he's been making so many cards analogies recently. This trade strategy is ridiculous. If this could have been planned out much better, with economists who believe in sanctions, but believe in them in a focused manner, and believe in them in a manner where you give the market time to readjust, you give manufacturers time to invest, and time to manufacture. You give consumers some confidence that there's going to be a cushion. But that's not how this has happened. There's not been a gradually increasing strategy. They wanted to kick in the door and shoot with a shotgun, motivated maybe by the time window they have until the midterms. But even if that was their motivation, I think maybe it would have been smarter to work on 2-year periods of negotiating so you could use this as a victory for the midterms than the shotgun approach that's been nothing, at least publicly speaking, in case Trump's going to show his brilliant chess smash at the end of this, but a shit show. And privately, from all of the things that I've read, a shit show as well, from the reports I'm reading. But hey, I'm not in the room. Just tons of other sources are.